In the next 10 seconds, you're going to see a man lose everything. But what if that man is a powerful, racist judge? This isn't just a story. It's a look inside a federal operation to dismantle a corrupt system from the inside out. A judge thought he was a king in his own courtroom until the black man he tried to frame turned out to be the one holding the gavel. Stay tuned to see the exact moment arrogance meets justice and the cuffs get snapped on the wrong man. Or maybe, for the first time, the right one. Courtroom 3B was not a hall of justice. It was a factory. And Judge Marcus Harding was the foreman, a man who saw legal proceedings not as a search for truth, but as an assembly line of cases to be stamped, processed, and cleared from his docket. Harding was an imposing figure. At 63, his hair was a shock of perfect silver, his face a roadmap of scowls and grimaces etched by decades of perceived superiority. His black robe seemed darker than all the others, absorbing the light in the dim, wood-paneled room. He sat high on his bench, a position he mentally occupied, even when he was off it. "People versus Morales," he boomed, his voice echoing. "Public intoxication? How do you plead?" A young, terrified man, barely 20, stammered. No contest, Your Honor. Fine. $500 and 20 hours of trash pickup. Pay at the clerk. Next!" He banged the gavel, not with a single sharp crack, but with a dismissive thud-thud. This was the rhythm of his kingdom, trivial cases, broken people, and his own unquestioned authority. His prosecutor, a weasel-faced man named Thomas Kress, and his favorite bailiff, a hulking man called Big Mike, moved in perfect sycophantic sync with him. The morning dragged on. Shoplifting, a spat between neighbors, a DUI. Harding grew more impatient, his comments sharper. "Docket 22-145, People versus David Shener." Harding looked down from his stack of files. "Shener? Is that French?" "It's just Shener, Your Honor," a voice replied. David Shener stood. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in a clean but simple button-down shirt and slacks. He wasn't wearing a tie. He looked average, unremarkable. He was calm, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He was also black. Harding's eyes narrowed. This was the one, the small, insignificant charge he'd been waiting for. "You're late," Harding snapped. "My apologies, Your Honor. The security line at the entrance was full of people who managed to get here on time." Harding cut him off. "Excuses are the currency of the irresponsible. Do you even know why you're here, Mr. Shener?" David kept his voice even. "I am here regarding a citation, Your Honor. Failure to disperse and loitering in a public park." Harding scoffed, a truly ugly sound. "Loitering, a classic. Mr. Kress, refresh my memory. What was this one?" Prosecutor Kress stood, shuffling papers he didn't need to read. He was part of the performance. "Your Honor, on the 15th of last month, Officer Riley was clearing out Jefferson Park at 10:05 p.m., 5 minutes after the posted curfew. The defendant was present and refused to leave." "Refused?" Harding leaned forward, his interest suddenly piqued. "As in, an officer of the law gave you a direct command and you—" "What? Debated him?" "Your Honor, if I may," David said, his voice still quiet but gaining a new clarity. "The officer told me to move along. I was sitting on a bench, reading a book under a streetlight. I asked him what I had done wrong, as the park was still lit and there were other people." "Aha!" Harding slammed his hand on the bench. "Arguing with an officer. I knew it." "I was not arguing, sir. I was asking for clarification." "That's what they all call it," Harding said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that still managed to fill the room. He looked at the court stenographer, at the gallery. "They question, they debate, they resist. They never, ever just comply. And then they wonder why they end up here. A young woman in a rumpled suit stood up. "Sarah Jenkins, Your Honor, from the Public Defender's Office. Mr. Shener is my client," he's trying to explain. "He's doing a very poor job of it," Harding sneered. "And you, Miss Jenkins, are doing an even worse one by letting him run his mouth. What's your recommendation, Cress?" Cress smiled, a thin reptilian gesture. "Given the defendant's argumentative nature, the state recommends the maximum fine of 1,080 hours of community service. For a loitering charge." Sarah Jenkins was outraged. "Your Honor, that is completely disproportionate. The charge itself is questionable. Mr. Shener has no prior record. This is a simple misunderstanding." Harding stared at David. He saw the man's calmness, his articulate nature, and he hated it. He saw it as arrogance, a challenge to his world. This man didn't look scared enough. He didn't look poor enough or broken enough. He needed to be taught a lesson. "A misunderstanding," Harding mused. "You know, I find my entire docket is full of misunderstandings. This city is drowning in them." He looked directly at David. "Mr. Shener, I don't like your attitude. I don't like your excuse. And I don't like you." The courtroom went silent. Even Cress looked down, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Your Honor," David said, his voice hardening for the first time, "my attitude is not on trial here." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Harding shot back, his face flushing with color. "In my courtroom, it is the only thing on trial. I am finding you in contempt of court. Bailiff, add it to the sheet." "Contempt?" Sarah Jenkins gasped. "For what? For speaking?" "For insolence," Harding roared, banging his gavel. "For standing there and daring to imply that I am wrong. That will be another $500, and we're not done. We are far from done." David Shener stood perfectly still. His face was a mask of control, but inside, a complex mechanism was spinning. This was not part of the plan, or rather, it was a wild escalation he hadn't predicted. He was here to get a feel for the room, to observe the man he'd been tracking for 18 months. He'd picked up the minor charge on purpose, a simple observe and report mission. But Judge Harding, in his infinite arrogance, was ripping up the script and writing a new one. "Sit down, Ms. Jenkins," Harding ordered, pointing a threatening finger at the young public defender. "Another word out of you, and I'll have you sanctioned for misconduct. You are enabling this defiance." Sarah Jenkins, her face pale with a mixture of fear and fury, slowly sat. She was only 2 years out of law school. She was overwhelmed, overworked, and now thoroughly intimidated. She looked at her client, David, who gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of the head. "It's okay. Sit down." Harding turned his full, venomous attention back to David. "So, failure to disperse. Contempt of court. We're having a busy morning, aren't we, Mr. Shener?" David didn't reply. He knew that was the correct move. Any answer would be wrong. "What's the matter?" Harding goaded. "Cat got your tongue? A moment ago, you were a regular constitutional scholar. Now, you're silent." Typical. Cress, seeing his opening, slithered to the podium. "Your Honor, if I may. In light of this development, the state would like to revisit the initial report from the arresting officer, Officer Riley. I believe there's more to the story." "By all means, Mr. Cress," Harding said, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "Enlighten us." "Officer Riley is in the building, Your Honor. He's here to testify in the next case. I could have him come in now." "Excellent!" Harding clapped his hands. "Bailiff, fetch Officer Riley. Let's get to the bottom of Mr. Shener's misunderstanding." David's mind was racing. Riley. Officer Patrick Riley. This was bad. Riley wasn't just a patrolman. He was a key figure in their investigation. He was Harding's bagman, the muscle, the one who enforced the street tax and funneled kickbacks from local businesses and a certain crime boss named Frank Costello. Getting Riley to commit perjury on the stand, on a case this minor, was a massive escalation. This was no longer just a racist judge on a power trip. This was a criminal conspiracy protecting itself, and David had just stumbled into the hornet's nest. The side door opened, and Officer Riley entered. He was a thick-necked man with a face like a slab of raw meat, his uniform stretched tight over his barrel chest. He swaggered to the stand, a smug look on his face. He'd done this 100 times. He was sworn in. Cress began. "Officer Riley, do you recall the night of October 15th? "Yeah, I do. End of my shift, clearing the park." "And do you recall your interaction with the defendant, David Shener?" Riley pointed at David. "Yeah, I remember him. Big talker. Real know-it-all type." "Tell the court what happened." "Like in my report," Riley began, his voice a practiced monotone. "It's 10:05. I'm telling everyone to clear out. Most folks, they leave. But him, he gives me lip. Says he's not going anywhere. Says he pays his taxes, and I can't make him." "That is a lie," David said, his voice cold and cutting. "Silence!" Harding roared, his gavel crashing down. "You are not to speak. One more outburst, and I will have the bailiff gag you. Do you understand me?" David locked eyes with the judge. The look that passed between them was electric. Harding saw only defiance. David saw a man self-destructing. Cress continued. "So, he was verbally non-compliant. What happened next?" "He gets up in my face," Riley said, warming to his performance. "Tells me to go find some real criminals. He's getting aggressive, puffs up his chest. I tell him he's under arrest. He tenses up, tries to pull away. I had to, subdue him. Put him on the ground. He was resisting." "Resisting arrest?" Cress asked, feigning surprise. "Why wasn't that in the initial charge?" Riley shrugged. "Judge here, he likes to keep the docket moving. I figured I'd give the guy a break, just charge him with the loitering. Figured he learned his lesson. Guess I was wrong." It was a brilliant, disgusting piece of theatre. In 30 seconds, they had manufactured a narrative. David wasn't a reader in a park. He was an aggressive, cop-hating thug. The original break Riley gave him now made David's protest seem like the height of ingratitude. "So," Harding said, his voice dripping with false concern, "you were physically assaulted, Officer Riley?" He put his hands on me. "Yeah, I got him under control quick, but he resisted." "No doubt." "I see." Harding steepled his fingers, looking down at David with utter contempt. Failure to disperse, contempt of court, and now assaulting an officer and resisting arrest. "Objection!" Sarah Jenkins was on her feet, shaking. "They are fabricating charges in real time. This is a violation of everything. They can't just add a charge of battery and resisting arrest based on a perjured statement in the middle of a hearing." "They can, and I am," Harding said calmly. "I am amending the charges, Ms. Jenkins. Your client's behavior in this courtroom, combined with Officer Riley's sworn testimony, shows a clear pattern of volatility and disrespect for authority. I will not have it. You can't. I am the judge, Ms. Jenkins. I can do whatever I deem necessary to maintain order and see that justice is served. Now sit down, or I swear to God, I will have you held in contempt right alongside your client." Sarah Jenkins looked at David, her eyes wide with panic. He was supposed to be a simple misdemeanor. A fine, maybe. Not this. This was a nightmare. David, however, was no longer looking at her. His eyes were focused on Harding. The observe and report mission was over. The data he was here to collect had been gathered. And then some. Harding wasn't just taking bribes from Costello. He was running a protection racket from the bench, using his pet officer to shake down and frame innocent civilians. The racism wasn't just a personal failing, it was a tool, a way to select victims he knew the system wouldn't believe. Harding had just handed him the entire case on a silver platter. The problem was, David was now on the wrong side of the platter. He was the one about to be served up. "Mr. Shener," Harding said, his voice now calm, almost gentle. It was the most terrifying sound yet. "Have you anything to say for yourself before I render my judgment?" David met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Harding leaned forward, a cruel glint in his eye. He was expecting a plea, a breakdown, an apology. He was savoring the moment. "I would like," David said, his voice measured and clear, "to fire my counsel." Sarah Jenkins's head snapped toward him. "What?" Harding's eyes widened. This was a new twist. "Fire Ms. Jenkins? On what grounds?" "On the grounds of ineffective counsel," David stated flatly. "She has allowed this court to railroad me, to fabricate charges without a single shred of evidence, and to allow perjured testimony to stand unchallenged. She is clearly in over her head. I will represent myself." Harding threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Oh, a jailhouse lawyer. This is rich. You think you can do better? You who are already in contempt and facing a half-dozen new charges?" "I am aware of the charges, Your Honor," David said. "Very well." Harding's smile was pure malice. He knew this game. A pro se defendant was a gift. "Ms. Jenkins, you are dismissed. Mr. Shener, you now represent yourself. As your first act, would you like to cross-examine Officer Riley? He's still under oath." "I would," David said, stepping forward to the defense podium. Sarah Jenkins gathered her files, her face a mask of confusion and humiliation, and retreated to the back of the courtroom. David turned to Officer Riley. The man was still smirking, but his eyes were wary. "Officer Riley," David began, "you stated I got up in your face. Can you describe for the court, physically, what that entailed?" "What do you mean?" Riley shifted. "Did I touch you? Did I raise my hands? Did I make a fist?" You were aggressive, in my personal space." "My personal space?" David repeated. "Officer, you are 6'2" and weigh, I would estimate, 240 pounds. I am 5'11", 180. You approached me. I was sitting on a bench. How does a sitting man get in the face of a standing officer who is 4 inches taller and 60 pounds heavier?" Riley's collar suddenly seemed tight. You stood up. You got in my face." "So I stood up," David clarified. "And then what? You testified I puffed my chest. Is puffing my chest a criminal offense?" It's a pre-assault indicator," Riley stammered. "A pre-assault indicator, I see. And your training prepared you for this. Did it also prepare you to testify that I put my hands on you, which is a direct contradiction of your written report, which states only that I resisted being cuffed?" Kress shot to his feet. "Objection! Badgering the witness!" "I am reading the witness's own report," David shot back, his voice rising with controlled power. "Which one is it, officer? Did I assault you, as you just testified? Or did I simply resist as you wrote in your report? Or was it neither, and you simply fabricated the entire encounter because I asked, why?" It was a tense situation." Riley was sweating. "Or," David pressed, "was it because you're used to your requests being met with immediate, fearful compliance? Was it because I didn't look like I belonged in that park, reading a book at 10 p.m.? Objection, Cress yelled again. The defendant is making accusations about the officer's character. Sustained. Harding banged the gavel. Mr. Shener, this is not a political soapbox. You will stick to the facts. The fact, Your Honor, David said, turning to Harding, is that this officer is lying. He has lied on his report, and he has lied on this stand, under oath. He has committed perjury. That is an incredibly bold accusation. Harding was furious. You are accusing a decorated officer of a felony. On what grounds? Your word. On the grounds that I was not alone, David said calmly. The room, which had been buzzing, went quiet again. What did you say? Harding asked. I said I was not alone. There was another man on a bench not 20 feet away. A homeless man, Mr. Peters. He saw the entire thing. He's on my witness list. Harding looked at Cress. Cress looked at Riley. Riley's face went from red to ashen. He remembered. The old drunk in the corner of the park. He'd never even considered him. A homeless man? Cress stammered. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The defendant can't just— Is he here? Harding demanded, his eyes boring into David. Is this Mr. Peters here? No, Your Honor. He is, as I said, homeless. He's difficult to find. But I'm sure with a day or two. Of course. Harding laughed, but the sound was brittle. He saw his opening to shut this down. You want a continuance? You want to drag this court's time to go find some vagrant to back up your story? I don't think so. This is a transparent delay tactic. It is my right to call witnesses, David said firmly. And it is my right to manage my docket, Harding roared. Your request for a continuance is denied. This court finds Officer Riley's testimony to be credible. Yours it finds to be self-serving and frankly insulting. We are moving on. So the officer's testimony, which he has contradicted himself, is credible, David stated. Not as a question, but as a confirmation. And my request to call a witness who would prove my innocence is denied. Is that the ruling of this court? It was a trap. David was baiting him, summarizing the entire judicial malfeasance in one neat, recordable sentence. And Harding, blinded by his own rage and power, walked right into it. That is exactly the ruling of this court, Mr. Shener. I find you have no credible defense. Your cross-examination was a pathetic failure. We are moving to sentencing. Harding was high on his own power. He had beaten back the challenge. He had stared down the insolent black man and his phantom homeless witness. He had protected his officer, his system. He turned to the bailiff. Big Mike, please place Mr. Shener in restraints. His little performance is over, and I don't trust him. David didn't resist. He put his hands behind his back as the massive bailiff approached and snapped the cold, heavy metal of the handcuffs around his wrists. The click-click of the latch was deafeningly loud in the silent room. David was now, officially, a prisoner. He had been processed. The assembly line was complete. Now, Judge Harding said, a preening, triumphant smile spreading across his face as he looked at the cuffed man standing before him. Let's talk about your future, or what's left of it. The air in the courtroom was thick and sour. Sarah Jenkins watched from the back row, her legal pad clutched in her lap, her pen digging into the paper. She was witnessing a public lynching, sanctioned by a man in a black robe. Judge Harding took a long, theatrical sip of water. He was savoring this. He wasn't just passing a sentence. He was delivering a monologue. Mr. David Shener, he began, his voice taking on the booming cadence of a preacher. You came into this hallowed hall, this pillar of our community, And you brought with you a disease, an infection of disrespect, an arrogance that poisons the well of justice. He stood up from his chair, pacing on the dais, his robe fanning out behind him. You didn't just fail to disperse. You failed to respect. You didn't just argue with an officer. You assaulted the very idea of order. And then you came here, to my courtroom. He pointed a finger at David. And you did it again. You slandered a fine officer. You wasted this court's valuable time with cheap theatrics. You showed no remorse, no humility. You showed, in fact, nothing but contempt. David stood silent in his handcuffs, his face an unreadable mask. He just watched. This city, Harding continued, his voice rising, is suffering. It is besieged by men like you. Men who believe the rules do not apply to them. Men who see authority as a challenge, not a shield. Men who bring chaos and decay wherever they go. You, Mr. Shener, are the rot. It was a performance of a lifetime. The racist subtext was now just text, shouted for all to hear. Harding was painting David as the bogeyman, the cause of all society's ills, rolled into one neat, cuffed package. And I, Harding said, striking his own chest, am the cure. I am the wall that stands between order and anarchy. It is my duty, my sacred duty, to make an example of you, to show your kind that in this city there are still consequences. He returned to his chair, sitting down slowly. The silence was absolute. On the charge of failure to disperse, docket 22, 1-45, I find you guilty. Gavel crash. On the charge of contempt of court, I find you guilty. Gavel crash. On the charge of resisting arrest, based on the credible testimony of Officer Riley, I find you guilty. Gavel crash. And on the charge of battery on a law enforcement officer. There is no battery charge, Sarah Jenkins screamed from the gallery. You can't just... Bailiff, Harding roared. Remove Miss Jenkins from my courtroom, now! Big Mike nodded to another deputy, who grabbed Sarah by the arm and began dragging her, protesting, toward the door. Harding watched her go, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He turned back to David. As I was saying, on the amended charge of assaulting an officer, I find you guilty. Gavel crash. It was done. A 15-minute hearing on a loitering ticket had become a one-man show, culminating in 4 guilty verdicts, 2 of them felonies. And now to sentencing, Harding said, pulling a sheet of paper toward him. The state has recommended, well, it doesn't matter. I have broad discretion, and I will use it. For the failure to disperse, 30 days in county jail. For the contempt of court, 90 days in county jail. For the resisting arrest, 6 months in county jail. And for the assault on Officer Riley, a man who puts his life on the line every day, 1 year. 1 full year in the state penitentiary. He looked up. And I am ordering these sentences to be served, consecutively. A collective gasp from the gallery. A year, 9 months, and 30 days. Nearly 2 years, for sitting on a park bench. You can't, David said. It was the first time his voice had wavered, the first crack in the facade. I can, Harding said, his voice a low, vicious purr. I just did. But the law. Consecutive sentences for misdemeanor charges. That's not. This is my court, my interpretation. Take it up with the appeals court, if you can find a lawyer who'll touch your case, which, I might add, will be difficult, as I am remanding you immediately. No bail. He looked at Big Mike. Bailiff, this filth is polluting my courtroom. Get him out of here. Take him to processing. Big Mike moved forward, his hand grabbing David's arm in a painfully tight grip. He started to pull him toward the side door, the one that led to the holding cells. This was it. The moment of truth. David had pushed the investigation as far as it could go. He had the judge on tape, on a live feed, committing dozens of prosecutable offences. He had the perjury. He had the judicial overreach. He had the bile, the hatred, the racism. But the trap had two sides, and now its steel jaws were closing on him. He was about to be lost in the system. Processing wasn't just a word. It meant being sent to the county lockup, where he would be just another inmate, his FBI credentials useless. He'd be at the mercy of guards who were, no doubt, loyal to men like Harding and Riley. He could be lost, suicided, or attacked by other inmates. He had one last card to play. It was a desperate all-or-nothing move. As he was being dragged past the bar, David suddenly dug in his heels. He used Big Mike's own grip and momentum against him, twisting his body back toward the judge. "Stop!" he yelled, his voice not a plea, but a command. A new voice. A voice of pure, unadulterated authority that stopped everyone in their tracks. Even Big Mike. Harding looked up, annoyed. "What now? Do you want to beg? Go ahead. I'm feeling entertained." David, still in cuffs, stood tall. The defendant was gone. The man who stood there now was someone else, entirely. "Judge Marcus Harding," David said, his voice cold as ice. "Before I am remanded, I am required by federal law to make one final statement for the record." "Required by what?" Harding scoffed. "Federal Code, Title 18, Section 3501, David said instantly. Admissibility of confessions. Harding's legal brain stalled. That was a real statute. Why would he know that? "And what," Harding asked, his curiosity warring with his rage, "is your statement?" David looked past Harding, to the American flag in the corner of the courtroom. He looked at the court stenographer. He looked at the main doors. "I am hereby notifying this court," David said, his voice ringing with power, "that Operation Gavel Fall is now active." "Operation Gavel Fall," Harding repeated the words, a look of pure confusion on his face. "What is that? Are you insane? Is this a bomb threat? Bailiff, get him out of here." Big Mike grabbed David's arm again, but David didn't budge. "I wouldn't," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "I really wouldn't." "Is that a threat?" Kress, the prosecutor, shouted. "He's threatening the bailiff. Add another charge." "It's not a threat, Mr. Kress. It's advice." David turned his head and looked at the main courtroom doors at the back of the gallery. "They're late." "Who's late?" Harding snapped at. "What is this? What movie have you been watching?" And as if on cue, the two large wooden doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a smooth, terrifyingly efficient display of professional force. 4 men in dark blue suits, with FBI emblazoned in yellow letters on their vests, entered the room. They fanned out, 2 securing the doors, 2 moving to block the side exits. They were silent, professional, and they scanned the room with the cold, practiced eyes of men who were very serious. The entire courtroom froze. The handful of spectators in the gallery gasped. Kress's mouth hung open. Officer Riley, who had been preening by the witness stand, turned a color David could only describe as dirty chalk. What is the meaning of this?" Harding sputtered, standing up. "This is a state courtroom. You have no jurisdiction. I am a circuit judge. I order you to—" He was cut off by the 5th person who walked through the door. She was a woman in her 50s, with short grey hair, a razor-sharp black pantsuit, and an expression that could cut steel. She walked with a speed and purpose that radiated pure, unadulterated authority. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at Kress or Riley. Her eyes fixed on one person, Judge Marcus Harding. She walked past the bar, right up to the dais, and stopped at the foot of the bench, staring up at him. "This is my courtroom," Harding blustered, his voice a full octave higher. "I am holding you all in contempt." The woman reached into her jacket and pulled out a badge, flipping it open. "Special Agent in Charge Amanda Thompson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you," she said, pointing at Harding, "are in my crime scene." Harding recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "Crime scene?" "Judge Marcus Harding," SAC Thompson said, her voice now a formal monotone. "You are under arrest." "Arrest!" Harding shrieked. "For what? You can't! I have judicial immunity." "You are under arrest," Thompson continued, ignoring his protests as she read from a warrant, "for 1 count of racketeering, 3 counts of wire fraud, 5 counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice, and 12 counts of accepting a bribe from a known organized crime figure." She finally looked away from Harding, her eyes scanning the room. "And," she added, her gaze landing on Officer Riley, "for conspiring with Officer Patrick Riley to extort and frame civilians." Riley made a sound like a stepped-on animal and lunged for the side door. He was tackled by one of the FBI agents before he'd taken 2 steps, slammed face-first against the wall, and spun around, his hands cuffed behind his back. "And you," Thompson said, her gaze landing on a pale, trembling Thomas Kress. "You're next." Harding collapsed into his high-backed chair, his face a mask of utter disbelief. This is a joke, a setup. On whose word? You have no proof." "Oh, we have proof, Marcus," a voice said. Harding's head snapped to the defendant's podium. David Shener was still in handcuffs. He looked at SAC Thompson. "Ma'am, if you'd be so kind." Thompson nodded to one of her agents. "Agent Ross, free up my UC." The agent walked over, pulled a key from his pocket, and unlocked David's handcuffs. The click of the restraints opening echoed the click of the trap that had just been sprung. David rubbed his wrists. He reached into his own pocket, pulled out his FBI badge on a lanyard, and settled it around his neck. "Special Agent David Shener," he said, reintroducing himself. "I've been the lead undercover agent on Operation Gavel Fall for 24 months, and you, Judge Harding, have been my primary target." The courtroom exploded. People were shouting. The stenographer was typing so fast her machine was smoking. "You?" Harding whispered, his face ashen. You're a defendant. A thug?" David offered. "The rot? Filth?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just a guy who was trying to get a read on you. I picked up the park charge to get in your courtroom. I just wanted to see, with my own eyes, if what we'd heard was true. I never in my wildest dreams thought you'd be this stupid. You did my job for me." "But the evidence, my chambers, they're clean," Harding stammered, his mind racing. "Your chambers?" David laughed. "Marcus, we've been listening to you for 6 months. The pen set on your desk? A gift from Frank Costello's legal team? That's a high-fidelity microphone and transmitter. It's been broadcasting your every whisper, every deal, every racist comment, live to a federal server." The pen set. Harding looked like he was going to be sick. "We have you on audio, Judge," David continued, his voice relentless. "We have you taking a $10,000 bribe from Frank Costello to throw the case against his nephew. We have you telling Kress which jurors to lean on. We have you and Riley planning to jam up the owner of the diner who wouldn't pay your protection fee. We have everything. And today," SAC Thompson added, "we have this." She pointed to the stenographer's record. "We have a sitting judge, on the record, fabricating charges, soliciting and accepting perjured testimony, denying a defendant his right to counsel, denying his right to call a witness, and sentencing him to 2 years on trumped-up charges. All of which was motivated. She looked at her file. By, and I quote, not liking his attitude. Harding's eyes flew to David. The wire? You're wearing a wire. David tapped a small button on his shirt, hidden in the seam. A wire? Judge, this is 2025. This is a 4K, live streaming, audio-video feed. The entire U.S. Attorney's Office has been watching your little performance. They said it was a masterpiece. Harding's arrogance, his power, his entire world evaporated in an instant. He was no longer a king on his throne. He was just a small, old, corrupt man in a black robe. No, he whimpered. No, please. Big Mike, David said, calling out the bailiff's name. The massive man, who had been frozen by the door, flinched. Sir. Agent. Sir. You've been a good audience, David said. We've got you on tape taking lunch money from Cress to Lou's inconvenient paperwork and a few other things. But you're small fry. Right now, you have a choice. David pointed to the cowering judge. Cuff him. Big Mike looked at the FBI agents. He looked at David. He looked at Harding, the man who had terrified him for a decade. He swallowed hard. He pulled out his other set of handcuffs. He walked slowly up the steps to the dais. Judge Harding, Marcus, sir, the bailiff stammered. Please stand up and put your hands behind your back. The sound of steel ratchets locking around Judge Marcus Harding's wrists was the only sound in the courtroom. The man who had, mere moments before, wielded the power of a god was now a common criminal, his hands bound by his own bailiff. You can't do this to me, Harding whispered. But the fire was gone. It was the pathetic plea of a defeated man. You did it to yourself, Marcus, David said, stepping away. He'd been close enough to this man. He could still smell the expensive, sour cologne. SAC Thompson took charge. Agent Ross, take him. Read him his rights in the car. I want him processed at the federal courthouse, not here. Keep him away from the locals. Yes, ma'am. As Harding was led down from the dais, his knees buckled. The agent had to hold him up. He looked small, old and pathetic, his black robe hanging on him like a shroud. He made eye contact with David one last time. His eyes weren't filled with hate anymore. They were filled with a terrible, hollow understanding. Thompson turned to the rest of the room. Officer Riley, you are under arrest for perjury, conspiracy, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. I want a lawyer, Riley blubbered as he was hauled to his feet. You'll get one, the agent said, shoving him toward the door. Next, Thompson walked over to Thomas Cress, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. Mr. Cress, your boss is gone. Your muscle is gone. The game is over. Cress started to sweat profusely. I'm a prosecutor. I have immunity. I was just following orders. Prosecutorial immunity doesn't cover committing felonies, Mr. Cress, and following orders didn't work at Nuremberg. It's not going to work here. But you're a man who knows a deal when he sees one. I'm not arresting you. Yet. I'm giving you a choice. You can go down with Harding, or you can be the first one in my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. with your lawyer, ready to sign a proffer agreement and tell us everything. Every case you buried, every charge you trumped up, every bribe you facilitated. Cress was shaking so hard he could barely stand. Tomorrow? 8 a.m.? Yes. Yes, ma'am, I'll be there. I'll tell you everything. It was all Harding. It was always him. I'm sure it was, Thompson said, with a disgusted look. Get out of here. Cress scrambled, gathering his briefcase, and practically ran from the courtroom. Thompson looked at the remaining court staff, the stenographer, the clerk, This courtroom is sealed. All records from today are now federal evidence. You will be interviewed. You will cooperate. Do you understand?" They nodded, terrified. "Good. Go home. Don't talk to anyone." They fled. Finally, the courtroom was empty, save for David, Thompson, and the FBI team. David sat down heavily in one of the gallery benches. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, bone-weary ache. He'd been David Shener, vagrant, for so long. It was a shock to be Special Agent Shener again. "You cut that close, David," Thompson said, sitting next to him. "He was one guilty away from sending you to county. We were about to breach, protocol or not." "I know," David said. "I had to let it play out. I needed him to pass the sentence. It wasn't enough to get him on bribery. That's a white-collar crime. He'd get 5 years, be out in 3. I needed the world to see what he is. I needed him on tape, destroying a man's life, a black man's life, for sport. That's the charge that will stick. That's the one that buries him." "And he delivered?" Thompson said, looking at the high, empty bench. "He gave us contempt, perjury, judicial abuse, and a pattern of racial bias. It's a gold-plated case for the U.S. attorney." "What about Sarah Jenkins?" David asked. "The PD." "She's in the hall," Thompson said. "Agent Ross stopped her, explained the situation. She's in shock. I think you broke her brain." "She's a good lawyer," David said. "Just new and scared. Harding's system was built on that, on good people being too scared to fight." "Well, she's not scared anymore," Thompson said. "She's furious, and she's first on our witness list for the trial." David nodded. "Good. And Costello?" "A separate team hit Frank Costello's restaurant not 10 minutes ago," Thompson said with a grim smile. "Caught him and his entire crew at their family lunch. With Harding and Riley in cuffs, their entire protection network just evaporated. They folded without a shot. It was over. The entire network. The judge, the prosecutor, the cop, the mob boss, all of them. Taken down in one fell swoop, all because a racist judge couldn't resist the urge to persecute one more black man who didn't bow low enough." "He called me filth," David said quietly, staring at the bench. "He'll be calling you sir by the time the trial's over," Thompson replied. "Come on, Agent. Let's get out of this pigsty. You're owed about 6 months of desk duty and a commendation." "I'll take the commendation," David said, standing up. "You can keep the desk duty." He walked out of the courtroom, not looking back. He didn't need to. The sound of Judge Harding's kingdom crashing to the ground was a memory that would last him a lifetime. The downfall of a sitting judge is not a quiet affair. It is a legal earthquake, and the trial of Marcus Harding was the epicenter. The U.S. Attorney's Office, armed with David's 4K video from the courtroom and 6 months of audio from the pen set, had an airtight case. But they didn't just want a conviction, they wanted a cleansing. Thomas Kress was the first to testify. In exchange for a plea deal that would see him disbarred and serving 18 months in a minimum security prison, he sang like a canary. He detailed 15 years of corruption. He described the system, how Harding would flag certain defendants, minority defendants, poor defendants, anyone he took a personal dislike to. Kress's job was to lose exculpatory evidence, to overcharge, and to pressure public defenders into quick, harsh pleas. Officer Patrick Riley, facing a 20-year sentence for his own laundry list of crimes, also flipped. He testified that Harding paid him a cash bonus for every resisting arrest charge he could make stick. It was a game they played. Harding, he said, called it community sanitation. Then Sarah Jenkins took the stand. No longer the timid, rumpled PD. She was a star witness. Her voice, clear and strong, detailed the atmosphere of pure terror Harding cultivated. She described a system where justice was a word no one dared use, a system where she had to beg her clients to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit just to avoid the Harding lottery, the risk of ending up in his courtroom and getting 2 years for loitering. But the most damning evidence was the audio and video. The federal courtroom was packed. The jury, the press, the public, they all sat in stunned silence as they watched the events of that day. They saw David Shener, calm and polite, and they heard Judge Marcus Harding, his voice dripping with venom, call him thug and rot and filth. They watched him openly solicit perjury from Officer Riley. They watched him strip David of his rights, one by one. And they watched him, with a triumphant smile, sentence an innocent man to nearly 2 years in prison. When the video ended, there was a long, heavy silence. Harding, sitting at the defense table, looked like a husk. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting one. His silver hair was thinning. He was just a man, a hateful, shrunken man. His defense attorney, a high-priced lawyer paid for by selling his home, could do nothing. He feebly argued judicial entrapment, a claim the judge dismissed in minutes. The jury was out for less than an hour. Guilty, on all 22 counts. At the sentencing, the federal judge, a stern woman named Alice Reynolds, looked at Harding. "You," she said, "are a disgrace. You are not just a criminal. You are a traitor. You took an oath to uphold the law, and you used it as a weapon against the very people you were sworn to protect. You weaponized your power, your courtroom, and your racism. You have done more damage to the public's faith in our legal system than any street criminal. You are, in your own words, the rot." She sentenced Marcus Harding to 25 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. The karma, however, wasn't just in the sentence. It was in the details. Harding was sent to USP Allenwood, a high-security prison. He lost his pension. His wife divorced him. His name was stripped from the law library he had helped fund. He was no longer Your Honor. He was inmate but the hardest karma came from the system he was now a part of. On his first day, a guard, a large, no-nonsense black man named Officer Wright, was checking the cell block. He stopped at Harding's cell. Harding, in his drab prison uniform, was trying to read. "Harding!" Wright barked. Harding, by reflex from his old life, looked up and snapped, "That's Judge Harding too!" He stopped. Wright stepped closer to the bars, his face unmoving. "There ain't no judges here, old man," Wright said, his voice a low rumble. "There's just us, and you, and you. You look like you failed to disperse from your bunk." He smiled, a thin, hard smile. "The mess hall floor is filthy. It's your turn to mop it." Harding looked at him, his face ashen. The arrogance, the power, the racism, it was all useless here. He was at the bottom. "Yes, officer," he whimpered. David Shener, now back at the FBI field office, read the report on Harding's first day. He closed the file. It was over. His boss, S.A.C. Thompson, dropped a new file on his desk. "New case," she said. "A congressman from Delaware. We think he's on it," David said, opening the file. The work never ended. The rot was everywhere. But today, they had cut out a big piece of it. And for today, that was enough. Judge Harding thought his robe made him a king, but all it did was hide the criminal underneath. This story is a brutal reminder that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But it's also a reminder that brave individuals, like Special Agent David Shener, are working in the shadows to expose the rot. The system isn't perfect, and it often fails, but today It worked. Justice isn't always served, but when it is, it's a powerful thing to see. What did you think of Harding's downfall? Was 25 years enough for the lives he ruined? Let me know your thoughts on this hard karma in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice served, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see this. And, most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life drama and intense storytelling every single week. Your support helps us tell these important stories.